Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the 21st Century Renaissance podcast. I am your host, Dr. Michael Lopiano, and I am joined today by my guest, Annie Nova. Welcome, Annie.
Hello, how are you doing?
Very good, thank you. Very good, thank you. Thank you so much for agreeing to join us on the show today. We are Annie has agreed to join today, to join me in thinking about this question and problem of the 21st century Renaissance, particularly within the context of her current work on Christian education. So Annie has a background in journalism. She also has a background in music. She is an actively composing and performing jazz musician. And she is also hard at work publishing and writing on themes from across the spectrum of Christian education and the history of Christianity in particular. So we're very happy to have you join us today. Annie. And
Thank
yeah.
that was such a good introduction. I couldn't have done better. Thank you.
Well, yeah, great. Yeah, not too bad for off the cafe. Yeah, but great. Yeah, I'm certainly very excited to have you here and to have this discussion. It's certainly um, it has been easy to connect with you on some of these topics, particularly coming from a music background yourself. No doubt that will feature into some of our conversation today. So let me pose this question to us so we can get thinking about it here. And so I'll pose it like this, right? So I've been thinking, of course, about this idea of a 21st century Renaissance. So maybe something akin to cultural renewal. Um, in the historic Renaissance, education and the reform of education was a central part of that. Without getting into the details too much, right? The intellectual underpinning of the Renaissance was this Renaissance humanist movement, which certainly in part was also a movement of Christian renewal at the same time that it was an educational movement. My question for you in this regard, then, I want to see what you think about this. Do you think that a 21st century Renaissance is happening now? Is it something that we need? And specifically, I'm thinking about this, right, as I said, on terms of education as someone, um, I know this is something that you've been thinking about. So what do you think of this?
I think in short, definitely yes. On all of those, we need it, and it is happening. We didn't need it, it is still happening anyway, and it's not something that we can stop. And I think even if you grab the word Renaissance, and I speak a little bit of French, so even if you break it down, when you have re before every single word, it means a repeated action. And naissance actually means birth. So it's again. And in order to have a rebirth, it means that something's died. And anytime that something feels stale or it becomes degenerate in any shape or form, is it needs a rebirth. It needs a refresh. It means that something, the original idea was probably lost. So it needs to be refound in a new way, which is perhaps what the Renaissance, the original movement, also did. It a rebirth of the arts, a rebirth of humanism and how we looked at it, and philosophy and things like that. So we definitely see that today, particularly when we look into things like the arts, they can look quite samey. So if they look quite samey, it means that the culture is just like quite
You
stagnant.
said
So
they look quite. I just didn't quite hear that word you said.
sorry, yeah, they look quite samey, they sound samey, they look samey. There isn't anything.
Samey, as in like similar to one another.
Yes, and
Ah,
there's
okay, okay.
novel going on in there that can actually quite grab you, and it's not something that you haven't heard before or something that you haven't seen before. So meaning that, well, if that is the case, it means we are not discovering anything new.
Okay. So
Can
it has this kind of repetitive
yes.
quality to it, you're saying. Interesting.
So if that is the case, then this means that we need to actually relook into the way that we think, because art happens through an emotion, through an experience, through a thought process,
Hmm. Hmm.
some type of revelation. So if that is the case,
Hmm.
we
Hmm.
need
Hmm.
probably a refresh in the way that we are
Hmm.
thinking in order to
Hmm.
have renaissance.
Hmm. So interesting. Okay, so you're I think this is right, good to certainly point out this idea. Okay, if we're calling something a renaissance, if we're calling something a rebirth, it implies that something is dying or that something has been lost.
Mhm.
It sounds like in terms of your thinking, when you're thinking about perhaps something that's been lost, you are especially thinking in the direction of art. You are especially thinking in the direction, maybe you mentioned philosophy as well. So maybe you could, how would I say this? Maybe you could elaborate. This is the word I'm looking for. Maybe you could elaborate a bit more on what it is you think that maybe we in the West, or at least maybe in English speaking culture, something like that, have lost, or has, as you've said, maybe become stale or repetitive.
I think this kind of ties to a bigger question of like, why did it get to that point to begin with? And I kind of feel like it started through education and then it just trickles down to
Hmm.
else. And one way we can look at it is like, well, with humanism, we haven't evolved past certain ideas which were very predominant, I would say, in Hitlerian thought or in Stalinism, or even when we think of eugenics, they're very tight today with how we approach technology. But then, if we approach technology from the space of eugenics, and that's something that was developed with the Japanese and Hitler, that's probably not something that's not probably the approach that we kind of want to have towards technology. We probably wanted to actually aim at helping humans, and by just generating a product without actually thinking, well, will this help humans, you're probably not going to generate a good product. And we can see it even with AI deepfakes. um if you have a deepfake, what is the purpose of it? To replace an actor? Well, what is that going to happen? Well, it's going to make somebody be jobless, because you've invested in technology is cheaper, so then it's better. But then you also wouldn't have improv, let's say. So something that you think might look good might not actually be a good idea, and an actor can bring a completely different idea and it can become more creative, but you're never going to have that with AI. Or even if you think of, so again, there is actually no purpose in there. Or even if you think of a cleaner's job, and I think we are being pushed in the direction of like everyone needs to be an architect or a doctor or like something massive, but it's like, no, cleaners also need to exist. They're allowed to exist, they have to exist, and there is a deep purpose within their work. And
Hmm.
it's like this, oh, a cleaner is not important. No, they are. So then if you think that a cleaner is not important or a chef is not important, that is anti-human. You're dehumanizing them. You're just saying, oh, you're just
Hmm.
nothing, a waste. So I'm just kind of waiting for you to.
Okay. 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 So it seems like when you're thinking about maybe humanism, when you talk about humanism, when you talk about you have this mention of, say, eugenics, or these sort of new man ideas that come up through, say, the totalitarian socialist movements, such as National Socialism, such as international communism in the 20th century. That somewhere along the lines here, maybe there is a loss of an idea of what it means to be human. Did I understand that part correctly?
Say so.
Okay, okay. So there's a loss. So you're also thinking in terms of, okay, what is it maybe that we've lost? What is it maybe that we've lost? What has fallen out of the way that we have structured our education, our culture, maybe our worldview, Weltanschauung, something like that. that a part of this is that we've lost an idea of what it means to be human, or that in some way our idea of what it means to be human is something maybe, you know, post-human, something like that, in the spirit of these sort of totalitarian ethics or something like that. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, I would say so.
Okay. Okay.
And I would even elaborate further, because you can see, well, what does it mean to be human? And I don't think that anyone kind of has a proper answer to that, like, oh, I just exist, or they would compare humans to animals. They're not quite animals. Like, there are resemblings, but we do have a conscious mind, and that pivotal part of being a human. So and we can see it with the social movements right now of like, I just need to pay attention to my feelings. And my feelings are always not really. Ted Bundy had feelings. They weren't valid. So he kind of tries to pay attention to, oh yeah, my feelings. What happens to, the connectedness we need, because we actually want to feel connected to people. That's why we have speech. If we didn't want to be connected, we wouldn't have the speech. It, like, nature given it to us. If we were not communicative species and we didn't want to be in groups, we were just going to be quite isolated from each other. We wouldn't be forming families. We wouldn't want to be a part of a community. In order to be a part of a community, there are certain rules that we have agreed that, hey, this rule works for everyone. Well, if we all start killing each other, that ain't gonna work for anyone. So what we have to agree is that within our small group, we're not going to kill each other. We are not going to, let's say, the sleep with each other's spouses. That just doesn't work for our community. So we are not going to do that. Killing, let's say, our the firstborns, that doesn't work for our community. So we are not going to do that. So in the minute deviates from that rule based on an emotion, well, I really feel like killing my firstborn, so I'm going to do it. It's like you're deviating from from an agreement that has been there from way before you, really. So then you're trying to kind of like shake the entire agreement of the community. And then a valid question is, do you have the right to do that? And then we also see that with a lot of the movements, like the trans movement is like, what is a woman? What is, and we don't know that. And I follow this charity that helps kids that used to be trafficked. And a very valid question that pops up among predators is like, well, if a child can consent to changing their gender, how comes they cannot consent to having sex with me? And that's where it gets quite oof. And
well, yeah, well, that point in particular, right, is, well, without going, I guess, going down this point, right, but
it's a very
without going down this road, right. I mean, that's kind of the point, right. I mean, Michel Foucault, who is a big person, is a big theorist who gets cited a lot in terms of queer theory and postmodernism as kind of a poster child philosopher, right, basically said, like, old enough to talk, old enough to consent, sort of a thing, right? But without going too much down that path, I mean, I think this is in relation to your idea of community here. I think it's important to touch upon specifically ways in which perhaps public discourse around, say, these phrases like LGBTQ community, without talking about LGBTQ or whatnot, right? And the nature of that, but the nature of the way that the word community is used. So it seems to me, to sort of encapsulate this whole, right, this whole bit that what you've said here. It seems to me that what you're saying is one of the elements of humanity or idea of human being that perhaps we've lost, that we are missing, or that has died perhaps in the 21st century, in some sense, is actually a genuine understanding as the human being as being connected to other human beings. That the vision of the human being as an individual is limited if you cannot see the human being as nested in a greater social fabric. That part of human existence is to be within a family, is to have intimate relationships, is to have, and by intimate, like dependent and sort of mutually supportive relationships that are signaled, that are sort of cultivated face to face or something like that. And to just sort of clarify maybe what I'm getting at and what I think you're getting at is with this idea of the word community, right? I think Douglas Murray is particularly somebody who's written about the way that this word is used in the context of LGBTQ plus, etc. Right? Um, okay, you have this movement. Okay, you have people who identify as such. All right, fine. That's a different question. That's something else. But the issue maybe is the way that this word community is used and like foisted through public narrative. And it's the idea that, and this is something Douglas Murray says. He says it's not a community. This isn't, it's not like people who live like everyone who identifies as lesbian or gay or transsexual or bisexual or two souls or whatever. It's not like everybody who views themselves as a part of this so-called community is gathering together in a mutually supportive, business running, law promulgating, town constitution, civic building group, and then saying, okay, we're going to run our own insulated society based off of that then is nested within the broader community. That's there's not a real community. They're not building that.
I think there is an element of I'm trying to build that, and I think that's where it ties to, or at least I'm tying it to Nietzsche. It's like I'm basing my community in a Christian value, and I'm trying to change the values in order to fit my narrative without actually asking you if you agree with me on that, and without actually providing you an opportunity to compromise for both of us. So then, well, no, that's not a community. And if you don't like the values where you happen to grow up, there's plenty of forests where you can go and you can start your own community based on the values that you have. But in this one, and that's where it ties to Nietzsche saying that, well, God is dead. And yeah, God indeed is dead. But if you want to completely get rid of God, which is where currently we're heading at, if you want to completely get rid of God, how about you strip down the legal system and you start it from scratch? You don't get to use it. We strip down the medical system. We strip down pretty much everything that was built on the basis of religion and Christianity per se, because thanks to Christianity, we did build a lot of things. And even if you like ask a basic question of how do you know what's good and bad? And I actually did have that conversation recently with my mother, being like, okay, well, how do you know what's good and bad? Well, because I just know, like, and I was like, yeah, but how? And I went very Socrates. Apparently he was just going to people and being like, why do you do that? And how do you do that? And why do you do it? But why do you do it? But why do you do it? So we kind of had that conversation. And she, within 3 sentences, started quoting the 10 Commandments. And I was like, but that's in the Bible. So if you don't want to follow the Bible, how about you don't quote the Bible? Or you don't say, well, everyone knows that you shouldn't murder. Well, it's not very obvious. It is definitely not obvious. And that's linked to a study I'm about to soon publish. And it did cover a section about the Roman Empire, where the Roman Empire, they were a pagan country. So in and of itself, discipline is not a bad thing. And that's how we see the Roman Empire, just very virtuous, stoic, disciplined, loyal, and all of that. All of those qualities are virtues because we base them on the Christian values of self-sacrifice and just serving the community, serving God, serving a higher purpose than yourself. When those qualities were based on a pagan practice that would sacrifice the rest for the self, it's not so virtuous anymore, because what they were doing as pagans is like they would go and they would just rape, kill everything that existed and in a village that they wanted to conquer. Then they would grab the king of that village's head, they would chop it, and they would use it as a monk sometimes. And well, they would be
Thinking
very
maybe of
close.
the Pechenegs or the pre-Christian Bulgarians here, like Krum
Yeah.
and yeah,
Well, it
fate
was,
of Sviatoslav.
yeah, it was very common. Like Julius Caesar's, he was very, very boastful anytime that he would just go and conquer a new town and kill everyone. And he was celebrated for it. He was indeed celebrated for it. Why? Because, well, the religion was based, paganism, on serving of the self and serving of the what I want. And you can even see it within the practices. And I did a year-long study on paganism when they do a lot of magic, and it's a manifestation magic. And well, what is a manifestation magic? Me getting what I want. Would it harm you?
Mm,
I
mm,
don't really care. While with Christianity, it's the opposite. No, you have to care. And that's what we decided to
mm,
base our society on. So then going back to the Nietzsche point is like, well, if you don't want to base, if you don't want to be part of the community we decided on 2000 years ago, you're free to leave. But on the bare minimum, if we need to change, we need to reach compromise. And at the moment, there is
mm,
no
mm,
such thing. It's like I have to follow what you do because of your feelings without you considering mine. That's
mm,
not a
mm. Okay. Okay, so it sounds like as well, right, linking this back to this question about maybe, what is lost and maybe what is meant by this, what understanding of humanity is lost, that in order to in order maybe to build a community at all, right, to have this dimension of human life, which is a necessary dimension of human life, right? Not just we're all these kind of atomized individuals that you mush into a clump, but in order to have this intricate and necessary web of social relationships take place, like you're naming law and maybe as well commercial activities or how to actually live together without you know in the confidence that you won't randomly break out and just start killing each other, something like that. To have that sort of network of relationships, that you must, among other things, have a consensus concept, a consensus notion, maybe about what a human being is. You have to have that. It doesn't maybe have to be specific to an infinite degree, but you have to have a socially constructed, sort of agreement on, hey, we're going to say this is what it is. So, for example, right, one of the things that the American Declaration of Independence, which is considered a founding document, even though it has no bearing, I mean, not no bearing, but it doesn't have an explicit bearing on the Constitution of the government of the United States. Obviously, it has some sort of philosophical and sort of, how would you call it? Maybe a valent influence, right? It establishes certain axiomatic groundings for the establishment of said constitution. So it's like, it's really a kind of philosophical constitution prior to, hey, this is actually how the government's going to work. In the sense, I mean, right, that it says that all human beings are, that all men are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that they're all created equal, right? That there is a creator, that a creator who creates these things, right? This is how it looks, right? That's the first thing there. So if you don't have that consensus, if you don't actually have an explicit, here's what it is, right? This is a human being, right? All human beings have. We're going to say if we're going to consider you a human being, this is right? This is what we're going to say that you are. This is how you are. Maybe that's a better way of thinking. This is how you are. This is how we are. And if you want to live in this society, you have to accept how we say you are. And if you don't accept that, okay, we're still going to treat you as a human being, but you can't live here. You can't be a part of the society. And so something maybe is missing when we don't have that. Did I understand that correctly?
yes. And I would say there
Okay.
are two parallel things then going on, being like, well, if you don't have a definition, how does a rule happen? If you don't have a
Hmm.
commonly agreed definition of what a human is or what a problem is, how can you provide a solution? You cannot, because you don't know what's actually wrong to begin with. And
Hmm.
you're just running like free electrodes all around. Well, we cannot really happen to sit down, have a rational discussion on what we are going to do and why does it need to be changed to begin with. And then if we also are going to strip down the rules, well, that is quite, then that's why you see so many people actually following paganism, sometimes without even knowing that they're following paganism, is what I kind of found. And it's like, okay,
Hmm.
want to go back to pagan values, do you actually know what you're walking into? And the answer most of the time is not, because as I said, most people don't even know that they're following paganism. Like something like the law of attraction is a manifestation magic. Something like numerology is also type of magic. Um, Astrology is a type of magic. So if you're going to practice all of these, you're going to get the repercussions of all of these. And when
Hmm.
I had interviews with pagans, they also said, well, why I wouldn't do law of attraction magic is because like they do it, but they have protective runes. But this is not something that is really known as much when people practice it. And it's like, well, if you don't know,
Hmm.
and you're kind of practicing it halfway, and there is a very valid reason why pagans just do the protective runes. Do they work is a completely different thing. The answer is no. But again, you just need to have a definition. You need to have a structure. You cannot just continuously free fall into something, because then that leads into an anarchy, and that leads into questions that don't really need to be there, like what is a woman, and does this count as consent, and does that count as I don't know, legal. I remember I was very young and watching Kanye West go on stage a couple of years ago and saying that he's running for president, and yes, I have smoked something, but that's beyond the point. And I was like, you just had a confession that he's on drugs. Why is the police not marching in? Just
Hmm.
because it's fashionable and it's Kanye West, so I suppose it's okay. Or
Hmm.
even if you go into the topic of consent, well, why do we actually need to define consent is quite obvious. Well, we have very scattered understanding of male-female relationships. And if you have very scattered understandings of male-female relationships, you're going to get into a sticky situation the same way you start promoting hedonism because everyone can do whatever it is that they want. Well, then you don't have a rule again. So then you're going to get into sticky situations inevitably. And then you're
Hmm.
going to have to question, well, how does a woman have to behave, as if there is a set rule for it? And how does a man have to behave, as if, again, there is a set rule for it? And then you go down the slippery slope of, well, what is a man? What is a woman? And then you go down into the slippery slope of, what is a culture, what is a personality, and then you can continue going down and destroying rules that have been there for forever. But my question is,
Hmm.
what is the necessity of that? Is there a necessity of that? And when you think of Christianity as a symbolic,
Hmm.
what is evil? Evil is the distortion of good. Evil is the manipulation of good. Evil is the
Hmm.
anarchy that leads into anarchy. So another way you can look into this is, if you have a tooth decay, the tooth is
Hmm.
not the problem. It is the decay. So instead of you just extracting the entire tooth, you have to clean it, you have to fill it up, and there you go. It is still functioning. You don't have to just
Hmm.
remove the entire thing. So yes, sure, through the years, people have had their wobbly ways that have created issues. But it's always like that with absolutely everyone within their personal lives. Sometimes you get angry, you say stuff that you don't mean. Does that mean that there is no redemption for you anymore? No. Does that mean
Hmm.
that the whole of the entire family has to change all of a sudden? No. We
Hmm.
we continue with the values that we set when we became a
Hmm.
family,
Hmm.
but we we just might have to tweak it a little bit. We might have to clean it up a little bit, but the structure in and of itself is still working.
Mhm, 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 mhm. Okay, so just to sort of recapitulate this a bit, um, so it seems to me that you're saying, okay, we have this. So in having this loss of consensus about okay, this is a human being, this is how a human being acts, this is how a human being is constituted, this is how you know, this is how all this works. This is an ideal of a human being. This is what, how that ideal should be conformed to or how it should not. Sort of what things we're going to sort of say, okay, this question, we're just not, this question, here's our foundation, right? We're going to all agree that a human being, say, has this attribute. For example, we're all created equal. Okay. It seems to be that, it seems to me you're saying that in relating this to Nietzsche and to the death of God, that in the 19th century, maybe there was some sort of, by no longer taking the Christian God for granted, that there was a disappearance of the authoritative axiomatic grounding of basically all of Western society, that became unpinned, unlinked, unmoored by the removal of that axiom, that axiomatic grounding. Okay. And that perhaps where we are culturally as a society is in a state of not knowing to what we ought to moor these questions again, and where, as you said, the definitions, the boundaries, the limits of these questions ought to be, right? Because it sounds like in illustrating this, say when you're talking about something like pagan magic, it's like, okay, if you're going to try to seriously believe in and live your life according to the principles of pagan magic, okay, well, that was like, for example, right, astrology. You use astrology as an example. Astrology is something that people seriously and deeply studied for 2,000 years in major intellectual institutions and said, let's try to figure out how we can, figure out how to cast spells and use protective runes and, manipulate people with attraction and read the future with the stars. Let's try to do that. Like, okay, if you're going to say that's really something we are going to make a part of our society and investigate, like you can investigate that infinitely, and you could try to construct relationships on the basis of something like astrology, like people did in, say, well, even at certain parts of Christian society as well, medieval Christian society, of course, and early modern society was very interested in astrology, right? Astrology does not kind of end up relegated to this role as sort of para-science or parapsychological or something like that, until maybe the 18th century, 18th and 19th centuries. Okay, so that you're almost saying, it sounds like you're saying, okay, if you want to go and you want to pursue that to an infinite depth, what is that going to look like, really? That people are saying, okay, I'm going to protective runes, and I'm going to try to manipulate people to attract them to me. What's that really going to do when you project that out into infinity? What's that going to look like for a society if that's how you run it for 100 years? What about 200 years? What about 500 years? What about 1,000 years? What's that really going to look like? And are you sure that that is really how you want to construct a society? Are you sure you want to try to experiment with that again? You want to experiment again with that as the founding or the foundation or a foundational ethic or rationale, a foundational logos for building human relationships within a complex society. Did I understand that correctly? Did I sketch that well? Did I sort of bring that together? Because there were a lot of things you had in there. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page.
Yeah, I'm very hyperverbal, sorry. Yes, but that's precisely what I was on.
That is okay. Good. I thought so. Right. I thought so. It's I enjoy listening to you speak. You have an interesting way of illustrating your ideas. It's almost like, right, you do it with brushstrokes, right? Like it almost feels like you sort of illustrate a kind of context and then the point is kind of there in the middle. And so, it's very interesting to listen because I'll get started. I'll go like, okay, this is interesting. How do these relate? And like you kind of keep me in suspense a little bit. And then you'll put in one more point, and I'll go like, oh, interesting, right? So it's very interesting the way that you speak and think. So, but I'm just making sure that I'm genuinely understanding where you're coming from. So, no, thank you.
In every complicated situation, there is always more than one person's fault. So let's say you say something incredibly racist to me, and I slap you.
Okay, try to avoid that.
Who is wrong? You for being racist or me for being violent? Well, it is both. It is both. So if, let's say, my fault in this situation is 10%, if I don't happen to fix it, today's 10 is going to become tomorrow's 20. And then the day after is 50. And it's going to continue evolving. And so if you change, let's say, the racist comment, but I never happen to change my violent behavior, you develop. I stay still. And that is a little problematic, especially in the grand idea of a society. And when you think of the idea of personal development. And when it comes to, like, let's say, even pagan practices, I suppose a Christian idea there would be, well, if you do a manifestation magic, like, let's say, let's imagine another hypothetical is, let's say somebody really fancies you and you don't know. And they go behind your back and they start doing manifestation magic. And they perfectly well know that you have a partner, but they don't quite care. They're just trying to do a love magic and they're trying to attract you to them. Well, they're eliminating the free will there. So ignoring the part where they're just completely disrespecting your partner, they're completely disrespecting you as well by just trying to strip you away from your free will of choosing. Now, isn't that a little bit problematic? So then let's say that person, somebody is doing a manifestation magic and it's the same love magic to them without them knowing. How does that feel? Not quite great, doesn't it? So then why do you want to do it to others? But then that in and of itself is a Christian value. Don't do to others what you don't wish to be done to you. But if you don't, what others don't like, you need to know yourself, but you also need to know what is the axiom, and you need to have thought your action through in order to do it. Meaning that if I go ahead and I do something that is going to hurt somebody else, but I don't quite care, I haven't thought it through, or I'm just very selfish. And in a society, you don't really have the luxury to be selfish. You do have the luxury to be wrong and to be forgiven so long as there is true repentance, but you don't have the luxury of being selfish and think that you can get away with it.
Okay. So it's something like, when let me see if I can think about this too when you speak about magic to clarify this a bit for the audience, right? Right. So it seems like you're not saying, okay, well, if somebody goes and practices these supposed spells or traditional magic or something like that, it's not like you're saying, well, by doing that they manipulate the laws of physics and then somehow because they believe it's going to work, right, it's just going to work, right? It seems like you're talking about the implications of attempting to believe in such a practice or putting one's credence in such a practice, and how doing that, how saying, well, I don't know, maybe let me try this, maybe it'll work. That, let's say that some outcome does come about, right? Some circumstances do come about, like in this love magic attraction spell, thing that you're experimenting with. And the person that you cast the spell on does go through some kind of a hard point in their life, and you separates from this person, separates from their partner, and comes, and you happen to put yourself in a position where that person could enter into an intimate relationship with you, right? That the very fact that you're not saying, just to clarify this, it doesn't seem like what you're saying is that, oh no, magic in the sense of something that that manipulates the fabric of nature or something like that of physics, right? Because that person cast that spell, that somehow that actually made that happen. You're not proposing a causal relationship between those things. You're proposing, okay, what are the implications for the relationship between human beings by attempting to construct a society in which society would agree upon an axiomatic foundation in which things were imagined to be possible. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, because we're not
Okay.
going down the realm of like, oh, does magic work and does spells work? Like, I don't think that that's somewhere that
No.
going
Right.
into. But the reason why you feel like you have to do a magic spell, and what I found through studying people is that whether you believe in it or not, psychologically it leads to the exact same type of behavior, being very obsessive, and you really want a specific outcome, and you progressively stop caring. The more obsessed you become, you progressively stop caring what somebody else might feel, and it gets into this creepy behavior. So either whether it works or it doesn't particularly matter. The whole point is that it progressively leads to an obsessive behavior either way, which is not very healthy for the person practicing it or trying to gain something, or trying to kind of like, oh, this sounds really fun, let me test this out. And you can see this even with, let's say, go zodiac signs. Oh, this is very fun and this is very fluffy, and I suppose I can just read my horoscope and there is no consequences of that. It's just pure fun. And yes, there is a certain type of entertainment going into it. But in the minute you actually start believing that, let's say, oh, I'm a Gemini, so I can never make up my mind, it strips you away from the responsibility of learning to how to do that. Or,
I see what you
oh
mean.
yeah, I'm this zodiac sign, so then this automatically means that I, like, let's say a Scorpio, so this automatically means that I just love sex, and I if I cheat, like, it is what it is. And it's like, yeah, but that strips you away from, first of all, it convinces you that you are that, and especially if you're young and you go into it can convince you very hard that you are like that before you've even formed yourself. But then also start excusing your behavior in the future based on a zodiac sign, that's not necessarily great either. And then it also has like this biblical idea of choice again, and it's like, well, God, when you go through the Bible, he always gives you the full information before he gives you a choice. Adam and Eve, if you eat from this apple, you will die. And that's precisely what happens, because we're put in animal skin that does decay. The soul doesn't die, but the animal skin does. What you
Okay.
look into the story of Pharaoh, and the story of Pharaoh is, well, he hardens his heart, and then it's like, why does he want to harden his heart? It's like making his job a little bit harder, doesn't it? Just don't harden his heart, and he's gonna give up on keeping the Israelites as they are. But no, he told him, I'm going to put plagues to you, because I want the Israelites to be free, and I already know your heart, and I know it's not going to be an easy task to convince you. I'm telling you the full information. I'm asking you to free them. If you don't want to do it, this is what is going to follow. But in order to help him withstand and make his own choice without actually being like forced into a choice, he has to harden his heart. And
Okay.
that is the fundament, even when you think of the laws that we have today, of like, you need the full information before you're allowed to make a choice. And once you have the full information and you make a choice, you know what the consequences are, off you go, which is also why I think people were not really putting it as clearly. But the problem with, let's say, the COVID vaccine, they didn't feel like they had the full information. So then if I don't have the full information, I don't want to do it. And then it was just like this. You do actually not
Okay.
that, and like people against people, opinions against opinions, and all of that, which became very tribal. But then again, if you actually go back to the center of like, give me the full information so I can make a choice. And if I happen to, let's say, die because I haven't vaxxed, that is kind of on me, you know? But if you don't have the full information, then you cannot make a choice. Or it's
Okay.
definitely
So
one.
yeah. Okay. So regarding, okay. So So it seems like, okay, towards the end here, insofar as you are speaking about, say, the story of Exodus here, speaking about well, actually, right, the moment of the Exodus toward, I think this is around like Exodus 12 or 14 or something like this. Um, right, that it seems like you're suggesting that there are certain configurations of, say, suppositions, fundamental suppositions about the nature of humanity, about the nature of the cosmos, about the nature of relationship, about the nature of the human psyche, about the interrelationship of the different parts of the human psyche, perhaps, that have been, by and large, maybe fundamentally agreed upon, that there has been a consensus, at least in Western society, based upon those foundations in the Bible, or largely from the Bible and largely drawn from the Bible. There's probably an argument to be made, at least in high culture and in high institutions, intellectual institutions, as well as sort of later medieval formulations of doctrine with respect to the Bible that's also based on Greek philosophy, Hellenistic philosophy. But right, this argument here that it seems you're making is, okay, that there has been this very, very long history of relationships and fundamental assumptions that are based on and based in the grounding texts of the Bible. Okay, and perhaps more generally of Christianity's interpretation of and teaching of those texts throughout society for maybe something like 1,500 years. Okay, did I understand that part correctly? Just before I move on, I did. Okay, so one of the areas in which you are working currently, you have been writing for some time about the history of Christianity, and it seems as though also in this domain, right, writing about it with an eye toward Christianity and the history of Christianity as Christianity as this fundamental grounding principle for determining an idea, for establishing a consensus idea of what is human, what it means to be human, and what it means for human beings to relate to one another. So why in particular is it that, or is it the case that Christian education can still do that, is still doing that, that an education in Christian history somehow is a way for us maybe to get out of this kind of death of the concept of humanity? What's your motivation for investigating this here in the context of this problem of, hey, there's something about humanity that we're missing? Would you be able to elaborate on that a bit?
I think there are quite a few things going on there, being that
Mm-hmm.
you don't know where you came from, how do you know where you're heading? And
Mm-hmm.
I suppose one thing is, I think a lot of people think that just because they're born into Christianity, they actually know it. And it's a fundamental idea. No, you don't. And you do have to be very humble, which is why pride is the biggest sin. Because pride means, well, I can replace God, which is pretty much what Lucifer tried to do. Or I can just replace the morals that people have agreed on because I'm a lot cleverer than my ancestors. And without actually knowing that your ancestors, they had the same brain as you, the same biology as you, the same capability as you. Are you sure you can do better? Isn't it a little bit egocentric to assume that you can do better than people that have lived before and built towards something and towards a vision? And one way, so that kind of ties into the question: if you don't know your past, how can you know your present or your future?
Mm-hmm.
And then when it comes to the history of Christianity, well, something as simple as the Old Testament, simple. In Hebrew, every letter is also a number. So most people don't know that. Or why is Catholic bread flat? there is a very specific reason for that, that is tied in history, being that it doesn't have an egg. Because when you have that scene with the bread, it was actually the Jewish Passover. The Jewish Passover was, no, sorry, they were celebrating the Jewish New Year. And the egg is going to spoil the bread. So in order not to spoil the bread, you don't put the egg in there. So not to spoil the new year. So there was a symbolic meaning in there, which is why also the Catholic Church doesn't put egg inside their bread. But it's not something that is given to you to know. It's a knowledge that is passed down generation through generation to generation to generation. So it is up to you not to be boastful and to think that you know everything just because I can think. This means I can, rethink it. It's no, just sit down and actually pay the due respect to the people that have already been there. And in Bulgarian, we have this saying, trying to rediscover America or trying to rediscover the hot water. It's going to save you time if you don't try to rediscover the hot water.
I see. Okay, so maybe there's this very practical interest here about studying, well, the history of Christianity, at least insofar as it's like, well, what we have now around us, even who we are, say, in the midst of our lives, is a product of this inheritance, for better or for worse. It's like there isn't a choice. It's like you can say, well, maybe we could build a better society without this. But what you would need to do is deconstruct maybe 1,500 or 1,800 years of history, something like that, of energy invested in the world to produce what we have. And then if you take those principles and you go back and do it again and take those principles and have those principles, whatever new principles that you just cooked up, and let those grow for 1,800 years, like then you could make a comparison, say, between the 1,800 years of your principles, your foundational axiomata, and the 1,800 years of say Christian foundational principles, Judeo-Christian principles, right? And just kind of put those side by side and then go like, oh, maybe one worked out better than the other, so we'll go with these. It's like, well, that's nice, but maybe we don't have the 1,800-year luxury to go ahead and run that experiment. Maybe that's not very practical. So the idea of this, it seems that you're suggesting, is like, well, unless you want to do that 1,800-year experiment, right? Which good luck getting people on board to do that. Then you're working with a legacy that's got 1,800 years of Christianity in it and civilization built on Christianity. And if you want to move forward rather than backwards, then what you've got to do is you've got to work with that.
Yeah.
You have to work with that as the tools that you've inherited. And maybe you go a different direction with it. Maybe you do, right? It's not saying necessarily like, okay, all of these new ideas that we've come up with, or these new terms, or these new, things that have been pioneered in the past 50 years as far as the philosophical outlook. It's like, maybe there is stuff from there that would work, but using it as an independent seed in absolutely virgin soil is not practical. So it's like, let's see where it goes forward. But if we want to take this and we want to actually move forward with it, we have to find a way to integrate it into this 1,800-year or 2,000-year Christian civilizational structure in the West, in society, especially if you live in a place like US or Britain or continental Europe or something like that. You're going to need to do that. Otherwise, what you're going to do is you're going to be stuck, like you said, for 1,800 years reinventing hot water.
Yes, and
Did I understand that correctly?
Also means that you have to be oriented towards the common goal. And at the moment, the big question is, what is the common goal? It doesn't seem like we have one. At least back in the past, it was, we are oriented towards God and we will miss the mark, which is the precise translation of sin. Sin is missing the mark, missing the aim. But we are still on the bare minimum, trying to elevate each other, to be better, to develop, because we want to be good enough for God, because he's the ultimate good and the ultimate creator. And it is more likely that me, in my human limited knowledge, I will make a mistake. But the guy that knows everything, he probably won't. And I, as a human, don't have the luxury of knowing everything. So then the most logical thing is to try and put all my effort towards the ultimate good and doing the ultimate good, which in the past happened to be God, hopefully in the future as well. But if we strip that and kind of everyone kind of goes off of their own desires, and I can do this because I feel like it, because otherwise I'm going to be offended, we don't have a common meaning anymore. We don't have a common aim anymore. So then this is going to kind of trickle down and, oh, this works, but this doesn't, but never mind, it doesn't also work, and that also doesn't work. And like nothing works. Like a lot of things work in a context. And if you just erase the context, well, how are you so sure you're not erasing the meaning? And how are you so sure you're not erasing the purpose? Like even with universities, universities started because of monasticism. And monasticism started because they were studying God and they were trying to understand God, and they were not anti-God. Like even universities up until the past couple hundred years, they were aiming towards God and they were aiming towards helping people. And even within the field of medicine, once you graduate from med school, you give the Hippocratic Oath, being again, you're agreeing that you'll not do harm with the knowledge you have, which then puts a very big question mark on plastic surgeons on why are you gender reassigning? What is the necessity for that? Oh, because they might kill themselves. Well, they might not. So how about you firstly refer them to the professionals that deal with people who might want to kill themselves before you completely mutilate them? Because what if they're just confused? And I can give that example even with depression. Quite often you just go and you get depressive pills, but in reality, being depressed can also be a sign of ADHD, as well as anxiety can also be a sign of ADHD. So without you assessing them, you're giving people a pill for depression when they might actually have ADHD. So if they tackle the ADHD without medication, the depression is going to go away. But then that kind of ties into the Hippocratic Oath of like, you need to question. Your patient cannot come to you and say, oh, I have this. No, my job is not to affirm, and my job is to question you. Just like my job as a journalist is not to believe everything I'm told. My job as a journalist is to try not to be biased, to push my personal feelings on the side, because the truth is the most important. And that's precisely what happened when I was studying Simon the Zealot, the study that I'm finishing up now. And it's like my personal desires for what this character indeed was in history had to be pushed on the side in order for me to actually present the truth. I really wanted him to be like this character in The Chosen. And I was kind of like, oh, that would have been so cool. And yeah, it makes up to a good movie plot, but it wasn't the case. And if I continue just misrepresenting and aiming at presenting him like he was in The Chosen, like this former assassin, that wasn't the truth. That wasn't the truth.
Okay.
Personal feelings don't really matter in this.
Okay. So in addition, maybe to this deeper question of maybe okay, like what we can actually do to resolve maybe some of this lack of consensus between, say, what it means to be a human being, or what ideas, perhaps this, right? Perhaps in order to find what ideas or what notions of being human or what notions of how to relate to one another are most beneficial for us to move forward, we have to have some sort of idea of what destination we would like to move forward toward. That without that kind of idea, we're not going to be able to sort what would be beneficial and what would not. And so perhaps there is a way to think about it. It seems like you're suggesting that perhaps there is a way to think about that, or a way to figure out what would be a good orienting value to move forward with, or to move toward, by informing oneself of how the generations before us that were able to build our society, right? What were their orienting values like that allowed them to make what we now have. And maybe it's in our interest to develop an awareness of maybe some sort of version or variant of those orienting values, and if we're genuinely interested in building something similar ourselves. Did I understand that correctly?
Or even if we want to build something new, that's fair enough. But again, you cannot just strip your ancestors off of their dignity and their aim and their goal for your betterment of the future. And I think when I speak of Christian history, what actually inspired that was I had a lot of friends that thought that Christianity spread to the Crusades, and I was like, no, 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 no. It wasn't the case. The Crusades started because the Ottoman Empire invaded Portugal and Spain, and they were trying to fight them off and reconquer their land, and there was a lot of intricate details going on in there, so they were just kind of trying to chase them away, and then the Ottoman Empire ended within my Balkan ends, and then we tried to chase them away. But it was because of the Batak killings and murders that if somebody is brave enough to look into that, yeah, you see why they wanted to push them away. But even when there is the argument of like, oh, but Christianity only got their book 400 years ago. No, 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 no. There was the Diocletianian persecutions, which happened for about 300 years. So for 300 years, if you're a Christian, if you want to practice Christianity, the Roman Empire comes inside your house. You don't want to sacrifice to the pagan gods, you die. You have your book inside your house, it gets burned. So it was so many murders for 300 years of Christians that actually eventually allowed for Christianity to continue, for the books that were hidden to actually start becoming a thing that was just promoted in society. So then by you claiming that, oh, all of those people were stupid, it's a little bit disrespectful towards the people that were dying for 300 years. And so you need to have the humility of actually saying, well, why would they do that? It's like 1 to 10 people like martyring themselves. They were crazy, let's say, for 300 years. They were all crazy for 300 years. So many of them. That's a little bit. Even Stalin couldn't achieve that, and he was probably the closest thing we had to the rhetoric of just, oh yeah, you have to kill yourself for the state, and even he didn't manage to achieve as many murders and as much martyrdom and as much zeal in what I believe to be right, meaning that, well, it's impossible for all of them to be crazy to want to kill themselves or to martyr themselves, as we see it in Christianity, and they all did it for the greater purpose of us having the liberty to practice whatever religion we want, to treat each and every person with dignity. The Roman Empire was having sometimes kids piled on a side, and it's kind of like, I don't want my kid, so it's like a pile of babies that just dies in the corner of a street, and it's like,
You're talking about infant exposure, correct?
yeah. So if you have that, it's like, okay, well, we don't have that anymore, so that's not a value we hold. And discovering God in order to discover the ultimate good, in order to help each and every person be better and be closer to God and be closer to nature, and being humanitarian, if you again grab the example that I gave before with the Roman Empire just being boastful anytime that you kill someone because you're such a if you have that, well, we've abandoned that. Each and every person has a value, which is why you can protest. Your voice does matter. So we can continue that, but it's given us a lot. So you kind of having the audacity to claim that, oh, they were just stupid and didn't know what they were doing. It's a little bit narcissistic and disrespectful. So that's why you need to know your history. You need to know why it was there. Why did it start to begin with? And opportunity lies where responsibility has been abandoned, meaning that if we want to have a renaissance and if we want to continue without decaying, we do actually need to know, where did we start, where are we now, and where are we planning to head as a collective, not individually.
Okay. So right now, you are investigating some of these questions, particularly in, you're actively attempting to explore and learn more and develop a sense of the history of Christianity for yourself as well through some of your own research projects. And that is primarily, you're primarily doing that through Patreon, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So, let's say if I were someone perhaps who wanted to follow you along as you're attempting to learn and explore some of this, what sort of things would I be able to anticipate being able to engage with, say, on your Patreon, or you're also active on Twitter and Instagram? Yeah. How would I, as someone, be able to interact with you in that regard?
Well, what I do on Patreon is I try to give as much for free as possible, which is
Okay.
with the life of
Okay.
the
So there is a
saints,
free component.
the symbolism in there within my
Hmm.
Twitter and within Facebook and within
Hmm.
Instagram. So I do that there. But when it comes to like the very digging of things like Simon the Zealot, which has taken me about 6, 7 months to do, um, researching into magic, like let's say, and the ties within Christianity, why is it forbidden? That took me about a year to do. So anything that takes much amount of time, I put on Patreon and I elaborate with what are my sources, how did they get there, what was the journey to getting there, what was the logic. So all of that is on Patreon.
Okay, okay. So there is a bit of free content there. There's also, I think, there are some other projects you're working on as far as that are accessible. Perhaps there's early access or something like that. I've taken a look at it. Right, you have some early access things there, say for subscribers. But you have these. I noticed, right? You have some of these more short term. You have like weekly reflections. So you sort of have these kind of weekly updates that people can engage with on a regular basis. So they can engage with your thought. They can comment on this. You're quite active there as well. The audience can ask questions, right? Can put response, things like this. But then, especially for your premium subscribers, you also have these sort of larger research projects. Yeah, interesting. Okay. And what's your current subscriber rate or subscriber rate meaning like what is the monthly pledge sort of minimum for
The,
those who are listening?
the minimum is £3. I think there is
Okay.
an option
Okay.
more, but I just wanted to make it as accessible as possible.
Okay.
Mm,
Okay. Great.
Yes, if I could put it for 50p, I would. It's just that I do write in coffee shops, so it's kind of like, yeah, if I'm paying for the coffee, like might as well just put like the bare minimum
I
for the
see.
coffee.
I see. I see. Okay. Okay. Very good. Okay. So for those watching and listening, right, if you are interested in exploring this idea of Christian history, of exploring perhaps what may have been some of those orienting values, what are maybe some of those points of consensus that helped define what it means to be human, that define traditionally how we related to, or at least historically how we related to ourselves, or to ourselves, maybe to ourselves, but to one another certainly. Then you can follow Annie on Patreon. You can follow her writings in the history of Christianity, and follow along on her mission to develop a sense of Christian education, not only in the sense of something positive, factual, kind of here it is, but with an eye toward using it as a tool to help orient us with respect to moving forward in our future as individuals, as communities, and as a society. So you can find all of her information down in the description. Annie, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for speaking with me. It was wonderful to exchange thoughts and compare ideas. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate the invite. Thank you.
Of course, yes, yes, and thank you again to all of you watching and listening. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Bye.